Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here today. What a great turnout we have online. We have a really exciting session today, and I'll introduce our speaker in just 1 minute. So my name is Bree Aukeson. I'm a professor here, an associate professor in the Faculty of Social Work at Wilfrid Laurier University. And I'm also the Canada Research Chair in Global Adversity and Wellbeing, and I'm the acting director of the Center for Research on Security Practices. And this is who's hosting this workshop today with Dr. Ashley Stewart-Tufescu. And really excited to have everybody here. I was just getting the details from Dr. Samantha Henderson, who has been organizing this with us. And thank you again, Sam, for all your help with organizing this session. But we have participants all the way from bachelor's of social work students, master's students to PhD students, as well as faculty, staff, and others from around the world. So thank you again for being here. I'm going to introduce our speaker and just get started because the topic is really interesting, and I'm really looking forward to learning alongside with you all. Dr. Ashley Stewart-Tufescu is an assistant professor. She's also a registered social worker in the Faculty of Social Work at University of Manitoba. She's also appointed as research scientist with the Children's Hospital Research Institute of Manitoba, and she's a faculty advisor in the Master of Human Rights program in the Faculty of Law. In the community, she is actively involved with the settlement community. She serves as the vice chair of the Mosaic Newcomer Family Resource Network Board of Directors. She was previously a faculty member in the early childhood education program at Red River College, where she led several international early child development initiatives. Her current research is quite broad. She does research as well as social work practice, spanning 19 different countries through Asia, Latin America, the Middle East, North America, and Southeast Asia, including many under-resourced regions. And she focuses on promoting healthy child development by supporting parents and other caregivers in diverse country contexts characterized by conflict, trauma, environmental disaster, and resource insecurity. And if you know my work, you know why I'm connected to Ashley's work. We are very much aligned in our research interests, and we connected a few years ago over our mutual research interests, and we're currently working on a project with Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh. And so Ashley is going to be presenting a method that we're going to be using on in that project, but also a method that has so much versatility and so much applicability to both practice as well as research. So I'll pass it over to you, Ashley, and take it away. I'm just going to mention a little bit of a housekeeping issue. If you have questions, just put them into the Q&A, and I'm going to be moderating those questions and offering them to Ashley throughout the presentation. So thank you, Ashley.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Aukeson and Dr. Henderson, for this opportunity. And thanks to all of you who are joining today and giving up your lunch hour. I'm really thrilled for this opportunity to connect and share this space and time together and talk a little bit about a project and a method that's been really central to the work that I've done over the last several years, particularly working with children and youth directly, and now exploring and expanding the method and the approach into other research projects and other collaboration. So you heard a little bit about who I am and my program of research. It is quite broad and diverse. I don't know if that's to a fault or not, but I always find that I'm getting so curious about new opportunities and new techniques and new country contexts. And so, yeah, it certainly can't be pigeonholed into one particular realm or area of focus. I allow my curiosity to drive me in my work. So I can't see anybody anymore. I'm not sure if that's just how the Zoom is set up now. So Bree, if you can alert me if there are any questions or comments as we go through the presentation. And I'm hoping that everybody can see my slides and not the notes section. So Bree, do you mind just giving?
It looks good to me, Ashley. And I will interrupt, or if you can pause also and let me know if you have time for questions, I can also let you know. So
Okay,
that sounds good. Okay, great.
Okay, fantastic. All right. Yeah, I want to share a little bit about myself and where I work and live. So I'm hoping some of you have been to Winnipeg before. If you haven't, it's actually a really great place with a kind of a bad rap, but maybe that's what keeps our little secret. Winnipeg is a really interesting place to work. We have such a diverse population and a large newcomer population. And we also have the largest population of Indigenous peoples that live in urban centers in Canada, which provides also a really rich environment to work and live. And so I want to begin by acknowledging that the University of Manitoba, and also my home where I'm presenting from today, is situated on the homeland of the Anishinaabe, the Cree, the Dakota, the Inuit, Dene, and Métis people. The hydroelectricity that's powering my computer and allowing us to connect virtually is generated in northern Manitoba, which is home to the Inuit, and the water in Winnipeg that gives us life and sustains our life comes from Shoal Lake, which is adjacent to Shoal Lake 40 First Nation. For those of you who work in so any sort of water rights or resource insecurity, you'll know that Shoal Lake 40 First Nation has struggled to access safe drinking water for decades, and yet the city of Winnipeg sources all of our water from Shoal Lake. So I just want to acknowledge that. I'm sharing my traditional territorial acknowledgement, but I also recognize that many of you are in Ontario. And so I would encourage you to just take a minute to pause and these aren't just words, these are opportunities for us to actively participate in reconciliation. And so I encourage you to think about the lands that you're situated on at the moment. So I also want to share a little bit about my positionality. It's important to do so, I think, in order for you to understand the lens in which I conduct research and interpret research through. So I am a white, cisgendered, heterosexual female of European ancestry. I was nurtured by my mother, Joan Stewart, a woman who raised 2 children largely on her own with little support, and all the while modeled genuine curiosity and respect and compassion for others. I grew up in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, so the province next door, another great city, where my formal learning in anthropology, actually, medical anthropology and forensic archaeology to be specific, and social work began. So I studied both at the University of Saskatchewan and at the University of Regina, and studying those 2 degrees at the same time, actually, there was 1 year of overlap, and I don't think I could have got away with that now, but the time the universities didn't know that. But it was really the intersection of anthropology and learning about culture and different cultural practices and contexts that really influenced my social work practice and the work that I did back then and continue to do today. So then I relocated from Saskatchewan to Toronto, actually. So some of you may be located in Toronto with my partner for a few years before settling here in Winnipeg, Manitoba. In 2007, I said I would come for 1 year, and here we are still. My partner is Romanian and was a refugee in France after his family fled the communist regime in Romania in the late 1990s. And again, a lot of his experience and experiences of his family have also influenced the work that I do and the perspectives I take. So my partner and I have 2 teenage children together, Max and Nigella. In fact, my son just moved to Toronto for school, so I can't believe I have a 17-year-old living on his own going to university. I blinked and that happened. But all that to say, my identity is really centered on being a mother to my children. And it's really because of them and my early exposure to discriminatory child welfare practices, being a young social worker in Toronto, that shaped my teaching and research aims and how I advocate for children's rights and child protection reform here in Canada, and also in the work that I do in the international context. And lastly, I'll just share that my epistemological orientation is really informed by social constructivist, but also pragmatic perspective, pragmatist perspectives. So I am a social worker and I've been trained in anthropology, but oddly enough, I did a lot of my postgraduate training in the health sciences, an interdisciplinary health sciences program, and then I did a postdoctoral fellowship in psychiatric epidemiology and the epidemiology of child maltreatment. Those two could not be really diabolically more opposed, but really I looked at it as another additional tool, research tool and research method that I could use and have in my toolkit to do the research and good work I was trying to do. So having said that, I really do recognize my social location. I try to be self-reflective of the privilege and power that I'm afforded in society because of those facets of my identity that I shared with you. And I really strive to use that for good when I'm doing work in the space around childhood adversity and human rights violations. So thank you for listening to all of that. I'm, very grateful to be here and share the work that I'm doing. And I also would like to take a moment to understand who I'm speaking to today. Now, I'll just say that I am not technologically skilled, which is probably why I'm very much driven to the life storyboard and having that tactile, sensorial engagement and research experience. But nonetheless, we're going to give this Mentimeter a go. So if any of you haven't used the Mentimeter before, you can take your phone, open your camera, and hover it over the QR code, and a window should pop up. If that doesn't work for you, you can go to menti.com. So just put that in your browser and copy and paste the code over, and you should be able to participate in this little survey here. So I'm going to go ahead and start the Mentimeter, and I'll just wait a few moments. Okay, perfect. I hope everyone's able to see it. It's starting to populate here. Okay, very cool. It's got some representation from social work. Okay, a lot from social work. Great. Oh, good to see some public health, justice, and international development. And other, now I'm so curious what other represents. Maybe if you identified as being in that other category for your primary discipline, maybe if you could pop it in the chat, and Bree could maybe call out some of those disciplines. I'm just very curious. Okay, so looking like I'm speaking to the choir here for social work. Sorry, Bree, go ahead.
Oh, no, it's okay. We have developmental psychology. We have history, another developmental psychology. I know all these people who are so it's great to see you all. Education, compassionate leadership, EDI, refugee education, and crime prevention.
Wow,
And
fantastic.
inclusive education, critical criminology, education, research methodologies. So really diverse audience today.
A really diverse audience. Thank you everyone for sharing. And I'm hoping that, you come with your unique perspective. I'm hoping that you'll be able to see the utility of this tool and this method in the very vast, diverse disciplines in which you work and operate. So thank you so much for participating. Okay, so we're going to try one more Mentimeter. So we had success with that one, feeling pretty good. Okay, so, oh, perfect. And you've already joined. Many of you have already dived into the second one. So I'm just curious to know the level of training here. So are we undergraduate students? Are we graduate students, fellows? Are we maybe community folks? If you could share there. Oh, let's see. Okay. Oh, I love seeing the pie chart moving around. That's so cool. Oh, wonderful. Okay, so really nice, diverse mix. And I'm so pleased to see such engagement from the undergraduate student population. I really want to stress and reiterate too that throughout this presentation, please don't be shy. Like, I can't see you, but you're welcome to turn on your mics and ask questions. If you feel like you want to jump in with a question or a comment right away, I really welcome that. And I really also want to hear from undergraduate students. I think this is a great opportunity for you to connect with other academics, such as myself. So please don't be shy, and yeah, feel free to participate as much or as little as you'd like. So thanks, everyone. Good to see that there's a really diverse crowd here today. And I hope that you're able to take something from this talk. Okay, so let's move on here to just providing a very brief overview of the session today. So we have until 12:30 together. I'm hoping, or sorry, my 12:30, your 1:30. I'm hoping we can leave some time for discussion and conversation and questions. I always struggle. I always, create a very robust presentation, and then sometimes there's too much information. But what I will do is share these slides with you, so that you can just really sit here and focus and engage in the conversation and not have to worry about taking any notes and so on and so forth. And this presentation's full of other resources that you can access as well after the talk. So I'm going to begin by really detailing the story of the life storyboard. It's, as we know, many of us in the disciplines and work that we do, it's really important that we understand the historical context, the background and the origins of the research tools that we use and engage with, the various perspectives in which they originated from. So I'm going to be spending a little bit of time detailing the story of the storyboard. Then I'm going to move into more of the practical orientation to the LSB framework, the theoretical framework guiding the tool. So it's a little bit more of the metacognition, if you will. Then I'm going to get into the specifics, the overview of the actual kit. So what it looks like, what are the components of it, how do you get it, all that kind of stuff. And then the third and final part of the presentation is really just going to be some high-level case study examples of some of the research that I've done or that my colleagues have done. So again, please engage. Feel free to ask questions as they come to mind. I will be pausing for comments and questions as we transition between the segments of the presentation. And I will say too, that if we were in person together, this would be very much a hands-on learning experience. And so in that respect, questions and comments would really flow more naturally. And it is a little bit tricky to present such a sensorial, tactile, person-to-person engaged research method in a virtual space. So I'll try to do my best, but we can also connect at other times and try and recreate a little bit more of like a practical orientation to it if that's of interest to folks. Okay, so let's begin by answering the question, like, what is the actual storyboard? So you can see on the screen before you an image. You see this board, you see lots of colors, lots of pieces. It looks a little busy. It might look a little overwhelming. And initially, the storyboard can be like that. But once you understand the process and you understand the method, it actually is very intuitive. So generally speaking, the storyboard is a visual system that's designed to depict and organize personal narrative information that can be used in the context of assessment. So for social workers and maybe some of the psychology folks on the call, when you're doing an initial assessment of a client or a family, the storyboard can be used in counseling with different kind of manualized modalities, if you will, in practical and clinical contexts. And it also has significant applications in research. So really, it's this visual system of sharing expressions, recording information, and so on and so forth. And what's really important to note about the storyboard is what you see, that image, the output or the product is not where the value lies. The value and the utility of the storyboard is in the processes in which it facilitates. So I often sometimes get this question, well, like, how do you even make sense of that picture on the screen there? That's not really the aim. It's the process of how you storyboarded and created that narrative, the articulation, the depiction of the experience that the individual is sharing. The storyboard has been used across lifescapes with children. I myself have used it with children as young as 6 or 7. I also used it with my kids when they were like quite little. But of course, how you use it with children is different than how you might use it with adults. It can be used on in one-to-one situations. It can be used in groups, in diverse contexts, and as Bree mentioned earlier, in sometimes challenging settings. And I think the power of it too can be that the storyboard's been used in many contexts where there's limited access to technology and other kinds of research resources. So there's something really special about that. So the tool itself is a visual interview tool. It's been designed for practitioners and helping professions to engage with clients, but it's also been used in a variety of research contexts to capture those stories, capture an understanding of processes, and also to examine and understand mechanistic influences and changes. So for anybody who works in program evaluation or monitoring, this is a particularly useful method and tool. And so you might be seeing already that there's some elements shared between the storyboard. So you'll see like things like the genogram, the eco map, body maps, timelines, and also narrative therapy. So there's a lot of overlap. And so the storyboard's kind of this multi-dimensional blend of these processes. And really one of the strengths is it's so versatile. The open-endedness and the versatility to the participants, the content, and the processes and the context. So how it works is it's really about detailing what we refer to as the principle or the storyteller's life and experiences, right? And so it's depicted in this very responsive, flexible way that allows for those natural gaps and nonlinear expressions, as well as extension and connections. So again, it's really about the process of storyboarding rather than the product that's most beneficial and impactful. And so another thing to note is that the sessions can be, you could look at a session as capturing an overview of an entire life, or it may be focused on a specific time or event or theme in an individual's life. So I'll be talking a little bit about how I use the storyboard with young children to capture their understanding of subjective well-being and happiness. So something to think about too and keep in mind as we're exploring this is that most disclosures of like life material in a verbal mode, as in most conventional talk therapies, which some of you may be familiar with. So in a life storyboard session, some of that life material is translated into the lifescape formation or is written as notes on the board. And what is special about an LSB session is how the interface of the externalized, the visually evocative lifescape that can facilitate those multiple processes, the verbal exchange that give and take, the serve and return, the listening, the seeing, honoring stories, and also that increased creating awareness. So the storyboard really developed out of seeking alternative ways for children to talk about very difficult situations, particularly when living in war-affected communities. So the work began with early collaborations in the 1990s in Iraq and in an innovative arts-based program in Sri Lanka. And I'll be talking a lot more about what those specific projects look like. But keep this image in mind, this depiction of the life storyboard in present day, because I want you to see the evolution and how the program has changed and how the storyboard has changed over time. Okay, so I would really be remiss if I did not begin and introduce you to the creator of the life storyboard. So the image of the man on the screen is Dr. Robert Chase, a dear colleague and friend. He is the genius behind the life storyboard. So I want to really give him space and recognize the generosity he gave to me in becoming a part of this, and permission to share the story of the life storyboard today. So he's given permission for the content and photos, many of the content and photos that you'll see here today. So the story of the storyboard is really Rob's story. It reflects his dedication to practicing public health medicine in conflict zones and regions impacted by environmental disasters, and really his genuine desire to provide dignified, person-centered, and community-centered care for marginalized individuals. So Rob is a colleague and professor in the Department of Community Health Sciences at the University of Manitoba. He's not a PhD. He currently practices as an occupational and environmental health physician, but his program of research does focus on the utilization of the storyboard. So at the U of M, he teaches courses on immigrant and refugee global health, and supervises community health students and medical students. So I'm just going to briefly talk about how the storyboard came to be. It really came out of Rob's work in the 1990s as a medical student, and then a family medicine resident at McMaster University. And it was there that he was able to join an international and independent research team that was attempting to actually document and determine infant and child health mortality following the Gulf War, and to document evidence of war crimes in Iraq during that time. And so what they were using as a very traditional approach was, a very traditional epidemiological approach. So a multi-stage household survey design. And when he was doing that, he was realizing, and that's the actual article there, if you're curious to look back at how that work was done, that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine back in 1992. Many of you students probably weren't even around at that time. So Rob's been doing this work for a long time. Based on the analysis that they did at that time, they found out that 46, almost close to 47,000 children had died between January and August of 1991 as a result of the sanctions and the Gulf War. So here is just an example of how data was documented at that time. So Rob and his colleagues, they were survey teams. They were going in to gather this household data about child mortality and maltreatment. The logistics at the time and the required sample size have enough statistical power to actually detect a difference in pre-war mortality rates did require this type of approach. The field work was, of course, intensive. Teams were approaching households, trying to interview mothers about their children, dates and causes of death, etc. And for living children, things like height and weight were documented. But what Rob really experienced and realized during those interviews was that so much valuable situational information was being shared verbally, but it was going unrecorded, partly due to time constraints and the stripped down nature of the data that the data form that was being used. And at the same time, the reality that certain, data collection processes were not acceptable at the time, or, giving a detailed questionnaire, for example, would have been unwieldy and viewed with suspicion. So based on this experience, Rob comes back from Iraq, and he begins to think about what are alternatives that would be much better suited to field situations involving armed conflict or human rights violations. What are some methods that are more versatile and adaptable that would be able to elicit and capably record that data that was missing? And so that's really the question that drove his work and the development of the storyboard. So one thing that was familiar to Dr. Chase and familiar to many of us, particularly knowing how many of us are social workers, is of course the genogram. This is something that we all learn. One of our first year courses in social work, and it's also familiar to many others in different disciplines, right? The genogram being, it's this kind of very crude, diagram system that's used to record sort of genetic information, family history. But a genogram does provide a very quick gestalt of family patterns and a graphical representation, right? So, as well, from a therapist point of view, you can view multiple influences of, say, a problem or a troubled relationship. So, at this time, Rob was doing another project looking at the health of children in war affected zones. And with McMaster as well. This was now in Sri Lanka. And so what they did was, or what Rob did was, he actually took that, basic pen and paper genogram and created almost like a play mat so that children were constructing this for themselves. You can see the image there. The quality is not great, but you can see some children there constructing their genogram. Very crude, it was a bed sheet at the time, just some cut out construction paper and using various rocks and so on and so forth. But it was really during this initial work where Rob was able to discover how creating this genogram board game was an alternative interview method and recording method. And so what they found was that they were getting much more rich information from children about their experiences during conflict by using this type of engagement. So following that, Rob and some colleagues, decided that they wanted to continue this work and not only look at doing research, but creating a community-based organization that would continue to do this work with children on an ongoing basis. So they created the Butterfly Peace Garden in Sri Lanka with the idea being how to make good hearts in bad times. And it's just, if you're ever curious, feel free to go and take a look at the organization and the work that they do. This program was affiliated with McMaster University Center for Peace Studies and the Peace Through Health Initiative, and a very famous Canadian author and artist, Paul Hogan, is also involved in this work. And so the program of the organization was really based on targeting those factors that would promote resilience within children. So social supports, capacity to discover meaning in life, self-esteem, and sense of humor. So at the time, so building off of the genogram game, Rob and colleagues developed an additional kind of genogram that was a little bit more inclusive and involved and included icons. So this is the Ama Appa journey. It's called the Mother-Father journey. And this was a project that was being done at the Butterfly Peace Garden Center in Sri Lanka. It was a 2-year project for children with psychological distress as a result of conflict and displacement. So based on the genogram and the ideas behind the genogram, here the game evolved to depict the household, the present and the past. There were these cards and these markers or these icons that would be placed on a large canvas mat. And it would be facilitated following a guided inquiry process, so exploring life and family circumstances. And the purpose of the Ama Appa journey, or the extension of the genogram game, was to really to facilitate more comfortable expression through the creative task and respectful learning. Typical sessions took between 1 to 2 hours, and there was a quite robust closing process to honor feelings and the evoked memories. And this was an extensive research project. Children participated, and the results were really powerful. They were really positive, and they showed that children felt comfortable expressing and sharing some really difficult experiences and trauma. And it was also useful for them to process their trauma. So just to share a couple other examples, this was, again, a different iteration of the genogram game, which is, as you're probably seeing, the colors and the setup, it's transitioning into what I showed you earlier, is the life storyboard as it exists here. So this project was actually looking at doing the genogram game with groups, with families, to conduct household health assessments. So this was done in partnership with a relief organization that provides humanitarian aid and medical care to Buddhist communities in the Himalayan regions and in Mongolia. And again, here, throughout this process and evaluation of the work here, it was found that by providing the families with ability to conduct these community household assessments in this way, there was really much more robust understanding of the context and the situations that led to health conditions for these families. And oftentimes, as Rob was sharing with me, there would be very lengthy and lively discussions among the family members that participated and would conduct this medical assessment that could then be used to provide healthcare treatment. So moving on from Tibet, so we've been in Sri Lanka, we've been in Iraq, we've been in the Tibetan region, and now we're roughly around the early 2000s. And here there was an opportunity to work with MSF, or Doctors Without Borders. MSF had heard about the genogram game, and they really wanted to understand if you could take the genogram game and take it as an interview method and reconceptualize and reformat it to be used as a psychosocial assessment tool within a larger program evaluation framework for some of the work that MSF had been doing in various country contexts. So this was a part of a project called the More Than Just Bandages project. And it was looking at using the storyboard as a way for children to evaluate the creative arts-based mental health programs that they had been participating in, primarily targeting war-affected children over a 3 or 4 year span. And unfortunately, the project wasn't really scaled up and moved forward in the way intended. If any of you have worked with international NGOs or in regions that are characterized by chronic conflict or war, you know that best laid plans often don't pan out. So in this case, the head of the mission was actually abducted to an adjacent, a federal state adjacent to Chechnya, which was the target site for the implementation. So unfortunately, that work really didn't carry forward much beyond the project, but it was very promising with the work that had been done. So instead, what the team did was they took that prototype of the kit and pilot tested it with newcomer refugee children who were attending ESL classes here in Winnipeg. So the children were between the ages of 10, I think, was the youngest, and 16 was the oldest. And children came from Afghanistan, Sierra Leone, and Somalia, and again, very little English. But here, based on the experience in the pilot in Winnipeg, it was found to be a very positive experience and provided children with an opportunity to share in ways that they wouldn't have normally been able to had we been trying to conduct a traditional interview or some sort of survey-based questionnaire. So another exciting thing that happened in the early 2000s was that the storyboard became really embedded in the social work education program. So at the time, the U of M program, there was a BSW program. It was specifically an Aboriginal focused BSW program. Just as an aside now, the program, we have a master's program in Masters of Social Work and Indigenous Knowledges program. So this program has really expanded beyond just the BSW program. But what we used here was, or what at the time the researchers used was, they embedded this storyboard. So again, it's looking a little bit more like what it looks like now, to help undergraduate social work students to learn a method to interview and process psychosocial trauma among children who had been involved in the child welfare system, and to do so in ways that were more aligned with traditional Indigenous knowledges and Indigenous research practices. So this program, the use of the storyboard and the students in the BSW program has been going on for several years now with really remarkable success. And then just again, another example of this was that we've continued to work in the Winnipeg education system. So high school counselors are now using the storyboard, again, with students with English as an additional language in order to understand how things are going for them at school, where additional supports might be needed, what's the home life, for example. And there was a feasibility study that was published a few years back on the use of this among school counselors. And then the final project that I just want to highlight, and again, hoping that you appreciate the diverse context in which the tool has been created and has evolved and been influenced by, was a partnership with War Child Canada. So many of you may know that McMaster has, produced some really incredible humanitarians. Rob went to medical school with James Orbinski, who was the head of MSF. Samantha Nutt, who is the head and founder of War Child Canada, and Eric Hopkins, among others. And so based on a partnership with War Child Uganda, the storyboard was used and piloted to evaluate a peace building training project in northern Uganda. So this was an interesting approach because typically the storyboard was done one-to-one, or in the case of Tibet, among the families. But how it was sort of conceptualized and constructed in Uganda is, you can see that there was like the guide, if you will, in the center there, and there are 6 children situated with their backs to the guide, and each child has their own storyboard. And so the interviews were conducted. So the guide would propose an interview question, and then the children would quietly, without verbalizing their personal details, each participant with their own kit, facing away from each other in an attempt to reduce peering and distraction, would be guided through a series of steps by that trained local person in the local dialect and with the help of an assistant. So after completing details of the household, the present, the past, significant people and activities in the lives, the final step in the process was to look at sources of risk and resource for coping and resilience. So again, these were children who'd been exposed to conflict and resided in IDP camps. And so this was a really, really interesting project. The pilot was tremendously successful, and the recommendation was to incorporate the method into other programming and evaluation that was being done by War Child. So not just looking at children affected by conflict, but by looking at psychosocial development, HIV and AIDS, gender-based violence, child rights, and some of the household livelihood programming. And again, here just another image to show you how the board was kind of conceptualized and structured. So to move forward here, again, appreciating that really this storyboard came out of this idea of wanting to find a better way to understand children's experiences, often difficult experiences. And over time, it's really morphed into this really versatile, flexible research visual tool that can be used with a variety of research methods and different research approaches. So looking to the current status of the LSB, so over the years, approximately 300 kits have been distributed. So this has been to counselors and therapists, qualitative researchers, monitoring and evaluation specialists, academics, community-based organizations, and NGO personnel. Primarily, the work is done in person, although we are doing more virtual workshops now, and I'll talk to you a little bit about the project that we're doing in Germany as well. And there's been a call for recent online support for broader distribution. We've engaged recently with community of practice models, and there's been great integration in terms of research studies, lots of student theses and dissertations, et cetera. Here in Manitoba, we actually have a community of practice. It's Wednesday night. So we meet probably once every 6 to 8 weeks. And there's a variety of practitioners and researchers. We come together, we share our experiences, our challenges, how the board's working, what other people are doing with it, seeing other ways that you can use the board in your work. Dr. Chase actually had to set up a sort of like I don't know, a company, I guess, but he doesn't make any profit off of it, but simply a way to manufacture and distribute the kits, because they're much more sophisticated now than they were when they initially were developed, and I'll show you what they look like in a moment. So the storyboard has been published in roughly 20 studies to date, looking at using it with youth, newcomer workers, people who inject drugs, school-age children, newcomers and immigrants, you name it, like many different sort of populations and diverse research foci. And then one of the more kind of newer innovations is that Sage, which many of you know, Sage, the publisher, had reached out and wanted to feature the life storyboard on their new sort of Sage Research Methods repository. So last summer, the team worked together to provide an overview and summary of the storyboard. I will provide you a link here to see many qualitative research examples, how the board is being used, and sort of opportunities for engagement and collaboration. So with that in mind, I'm going to pause here. I think it's a good time to see if there are any comments or reflections. I know that's been a bit of like a long history lesson for you all, but I really wanted to show you how the tool has evolved over several years, and really done in quite a thoughtful way. So I will pause here, and feel free to turn on your mics. Again, I can't see anybody and I can't see the question, so I'll ask Bree if you can maybe facilitate if there are any questions or comments at this point.
No problem. So I think there's a few questions that are more about process. So we might wait for the process part of the, like how you do it and how you record the conversation. So maybe we'll wait for that. But I do have a few questions that are pertinent to to what you've just talked about. So one participant, Jason, he asked, would this also be considered beneficial for veterans with TBI? So it'd be interesting to know kind of what other populations this has been used with beyond the ones that you've mentioned before.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't personally used the tool with that population or in that context, but I think one of the beautiful things I think about the tool is you want to maybe convey something, but verbally you can't necessarily, or you don't feel comfortable doing so or whatnot. So you can actually visually represent that on the board. And so I don't know if that would be suitable to the population or the context that you're interested in working with, Jason, but I would encourage you to try it. That's the beauty of the board too, is like there's no one way to do this. It's not a prescriptive approach. In fact, it's the opposite. There are very little constraints. So the constraints are really related to you and your own approach. And sometimes when we're doing it within a research context, we have to, have more of a systematized way to work with the tool. But really, the possibilities are endless. Are there other questions?
I have a few other questions. And again, if they're more suited for the next section about process, please defer. But I have another question about how you capture the conversations that take place during the genogram game, or I guess as an extension, the life storyboard process. So do you want me to ask you a few of the questions and you can decide which ones to?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think I can speak to that one right now. So in a research context, what I've done is I've audio recorded the discussion that goes along with the process of creating the board. Some folks decide that they want to video the process. That's a little bit more involved, and because you have to kind of set the video up so you're seeing the board and watching it play out. And then other people don't record the audio. So it's really, again, there's a lot of flexibility. I think it comes back to like, what's the purpose and what's the data that you're trying to gather? For me with kids, in my experience, just having a simple, like, face-to-face interview, particularly with young kids where you ask them these kind of broad abstract concepts, you're not getting very far. Your interviews tend to be quite short. And not very rich. So for me, the storyboard was like a vehicle to really get at that rich conceptualization and understanding of some very abstract concepts with young children. So it was the audio that I was most interested in. So I did the classic, like I recorded it, and then I did a reflexive thematic analysis on the transcripts. But again, it really depends on the purpose and what data you're most interested in.
Yeah, and I think you're emphasizing how much of the process, it's all about the process. I think that's kind of
Yeah.
the takeaway for today. It's just about what that looks like. Tara is asking, can you share how older adolescents respond to the LSB? Were they responsive to the activity? And so it'd be interesting to know like the different age groups that would be responsive. It sounds like you've used it with adults and children, but maybe what are some nuances in terms of the age developmental, accessibility of the method?
Yeah, so I found it like on little kids, like I'm talking like 7, 8, 10, they love it. They think it's like a game. It's fun for them. And kids like to be busy with their hands and playing, so there's like an element of play. Um, so for kids, when you frame it as like this is a game, we're going to play a board game, they think it's like super fun. And adolescents also engage with it, but I think it's more personality at that point because some people are a little bit more like hands-on and want to get in there, and other people, their boards are kind of less fulsome, a little bit more sparse. But I haven't had any experiences or challenges engaging with participants, but to be honest, like some of the work I'm presenting is work of others. So I can't speak to their experiences. But this is where community of practice comes in, right? Because if you are experiencing challenges or you are struggling with some sort of level of engagement, you can definitely reach out to others who have more experience using the storyboard to hear from them ways to, promote engagement or, create more comfort among your participants.
Great. And Fatma, hello, Fatma. It's good to see you. How can we be sure that children's traumas, and I include all participants' traumas or experiences aren't triggered while applying this board, and what do we need to do to make sure of this? And it's these ethical questions that I've chatted about, Ashley, and it's not necessarily that these traumas are we suppress them, we don't want them to come out, but how do we deal with them when those challenging experiences come out?
Yeah, so containment and safety is a really key component to the storyboard, and I'm going to show you one of the strategies that we use. They're called secret cards. And when we are orienting, whether it be, well, anyone that's participating in the process, we talk about safeguarding and we talk about, containment, and that you don't need to share anything that you're uncomfortable sharing. And we have these particular cards, which I'll show you in a moment, that can be placed on the board and represent something that might be related to the story that's being constructed, but that doesn't want to be unpacked in that moment. And I'll show you how that's sort of used. The other thing too, and with any research, is like we always want to ensure that if a participant has been activated or there's some distress, that we always have supports available, just like we would if we were even doing a survey, right? Access to community health support services, crisis lines, that kind of stuff. And then with children, we always have parental consent ahead of time. I mean, that's a whole nother topic and struggle that I deal with in doing research directly with children. But parents consent to children's participation prior to engaging in the process.
Another question from Carmel Amadi. Hi, Carmel, and good to see you as well. What incites the discussion that takes place during the creation process? Are there particular questions that are asked, or participants just asked to describe what they're creating? What does that process look like? And it sounds like it might be case by case, research by research, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So it truly is like if you have a particular research objective in mind, you might have a semi-structured interview guide that's going to guide the discussion as you're creating the lifescape. Other times it might be a little bit more fluid and open-ended, and those are specific to research. If you were using it in like a clinical or a practical context, like I think this tool is phenomenal for assessment. Really conducting a fulsome biopsychosocial assessment when you're engaging with a new client. So again, it really depends on what's the information that you're trying to, draw out, or what's the issue or the theme that you're trying to understand. So I will say too, for some researchers, the flexibility can be a little bit uncomfortable at times. But it really does come back to what's the purpose? What are you trying to gather and understand by engaging in your research or with your client?
There's two more questions that I know you want to move on to the next section. So let me kind of consolidate them because I think a good question is, how is this different from photo voice? And then the other question is, what kind of materials do you use? But I think you're going to get into that in the next section. So, yeah.
So I think that there are some similarities to photo voice, and I personally have never used photo voice as like as a research method. So I'm not speaking from a place of expertise, but I mean, I think there are similarities. It's the storytellers trying to look for something or conceptualize something or show something that represents a particular concept or meaning or construct to them. So I think there are similarities, but I can't speak to the photo voice process. But I'd be happy to have a conversation with you about it if you are, open to that, and would help me to learn the similarities and differences as well. For the sake of time, I'm going to move on to really talking about the orientation, more of the theoretical sort of framework. But I'm also appreciating that I think we want to have discussion. And so I'm just going to kind of very briefly provide, there's a lot of text on this slide, don't worry about it. I'll explain it to you. The sort of the metacognition of the storyboard is really informed by concepts foundational to linguistic studies, and I'm no expert in that, but these three interrelated aspects of semantics, syntax, and pragmatics. So again, it's looking at how you make sense of meanings of the world of words, in your discourse, the grammatical rules and that specify how those words should be conveyed and conveyed and combined, and the relationship between the meaning of an utterance and the context in which the utterance occurs. And so these concepts are kind of, so this is, I guess, conceptualized, and then in the storyboard, these concepts are trying to be operationalized throughout the process and with the actual components of the kit. So semantics here equate to the meanings behind the shapes, the cards, the icons, and the markers. And you'll see what those look like in a moment. The syntax is really the grammatical convention to record information in terms of card arrangements and notations. Again, you'd be very familiar with some of these sort of standard notations with a genogram, for example. And then the pragmatics is referring to the life storyboard, generally speaking, as a communication mode, or in the context of, let's say, counseling as a platform. It provides an opportunity to co-create between you and your clients. So there's two terms that are really important to understand here. So here's sort of the verbal and visual modes. And again, it's that shared didactic attention, that joint attention, that's important, and where that dialogical transformation is happening. So the yellow is really the principal or the storyteller. If you want to think about it in conventional terms, it's the interviewee or the participant. So they've got their life experiences, they're thinking about particular events. As the researcher or as a practitioner or the counselor, you are the guide, you're the helper. That is your role, is to guide and assist in the articulation and the description of the stories or the themes or whatever is being discussed at the time. So here again is this model a little bit more fulsome and putting it within the context of the storyboard. So what you could see is there's the blue, there's the yellow, the orange, which is supposed to be the red, but the timeline. And I'll talk to you about the other spaces in a moment. But throughout this engagement, both the storyteller, the principal, and the researcher or the guide are active in the research process through interpreting the client's thoughts, them sharing their feelings and behaviors as they co-create meaning and are putting it on the board, and you as a guide being attuned to what comes out and what is being presented. So as a participant can visually experience different aspects of, their situation. This process, by kind of having that bird's eye view, can really enhance new understanding and reflexivity related to those external elements of the person's life. So again, the researcher is facilitating the construction of the client's experiences or feelings or situation. And there are sort of three pathways of communication. And I'm not going to spend too much time getting into this, but it's that dialogical process, almost a little bit like that serve and return, the exchange between the guide and the principal or the storyteller. And most importantly, the principal or the storyteller's reflections, visualizing their situation, and the guide's engagement in that process. So what I found in my work is what's really most interesting to me, particularly with young children, is when children create this lifescape. So they see their situation on the board. There's so much reflexivity and insights that happen in that process of taking a bird's eye view to your life. And to me, it's really interesting to capture that dialogue and hear that transformation being shared aloud. It's really a fascinating process. So I'm not gonna. This is, I think, let's leave this for today. You can have further conversation with me after, because I think we just want to get into the kit and see what it looks like. But again, this is really, it's a multidimensional perspective. There's many, it's metacognitive in a sense. There's this multi-layered approach to it. And there's these different perspectives that are being played out as the storyboard is creating. And again, it's not the output or the product that's the valuable, like the thing that we're most interested in. It's the transformation, it's the process, it's the dialogue that happens as that's occurring. So just a couple of considerations that we already kind of talked about, thanks to your excellent questions, is depending on why you're using the storyboard. So is it that you're using it in sort of like a professional or a therapeutic context or discipline? How directive or non-directive do you want the approach to be based on, your own research aims or, clinical goals, if you will? Also, the principal or the storyteller or the client. So things you want to consider are how receptive are they to nonverbal and visual modes of expression. You want to think about attention span, neurocognitive development and capacity, and also perhaps sometimes like emotional literacy, because you're not just focusing on those external factors in someone's life, but you're focusing on, well, it's a little bit like CBT, right? It's just not just focusing on the behavior, but it's focusing on the thoughts and feelings that are associated with those behaviors and those processes. And then you want to think about the session. So is this just a one-time process, or are you going to, come back and keep using the storyboard? Are you going to create the storyboard and then leave it and then add more to it in future sessions? What's your setting situation like, right? And time constraints and so on and so forth. So there are a number of things you want to consider when you're actually engaging with the process. Okay, let's get into the actual kit itself. So here's the most sort of current iteration of the storyboard, although I'm certain this is probably not going to be the last version of it. Again, the storyboarding is a means, not an end in of itself. So it's not prescriptive. There's never an assumed context. The approach really will depend on your aims as the guide or the researcher, or maybe it's as a clinician, the storyteller you're working with, and the session. And so it's really important that you go in with a very clear understanding of what you're trying to achieve here and why. So here's some pictures of how the kit actually presents. So it's in like a bag. I actually have it right here. I don't know if you can see it on my bench there behind me, but it's not too large. It's got little straps on it, so you could wear it as a backpack if that would be an easy way for you to transport it. It is a little bit heavy initially because it comes with a lot of extra stuff and a lot of extra magnets those magnet sheets are very, very heavy. So once you create the set for your own needs, then you can really reduce the weight of the set and the kit. And you have plenty of extra magnetic cards and things like that that you might not be using at that particular moment in time, but may be useful for you moving forward. You have a guide. The kit comes with everything you need, and then some. You have the clay, you've got the palettes, you've got icons for pretty much everything you could possibly imagine. Again, these are just for your resources. It's not like you're going to be using them with every session and with every client, and it comes in a box. So it's quite well packaged and designed at this point in time. As I said, one of the limitations is it's a little bit heavy. And when you first get the kit, I think it can be a little bit overwhelming for people who aren't yet familiar with it. But over time, the learning card, you develop a comfort with it very, very quickly. And again, there's no one way to do it. So your way is the right way. So do what works for you. So I'm just going to talk about some of the elements of the kit, and then we'll move into looking at some of the specific research studies and examples. So the board, as you've been seeing, as I visualized it throughout the presentation, it's set up so that it's these 4 demarcated zones. So the board itself is, it's not huge. It certainly fits on a conventional size table. And it comes with these 23 magnetic elements and cards and markers. And it's all, you have like a dry erase pen and also the clay. So it's super easy to clean up and move on to using with a different client or research participant. So just to give you a sense down here, the yellow zone, this represents really the personal zone or self. So if you were considering something from a feeling or internal perspective or vantage point, and you wanted to put it on the board, that's where it would be represented. So things like your spirit, your mind, your body. There's a little body card as well that I can tell you about afterwards. So the yellow zone is yourself. And the yellow cards, the person's shapes, just like in a genogram, those represent the storyteller or the self. The green zone represents that broader perspective, or your community. So your family, your close friends, relationships, and we call this often the stage of the drama. So when we're looking at things like relationships and interactions, often we see them being placed on the board in this region. The blue zone represents the broader community perspective, your environment. And then the red zone here is your timeline, so where you can put and represent various specific events or acts in one's life. And how you use this really is dependent, again, on the research question that you're curious about or the purpose of the engagement. There are plenty of cards and little magnetic things that are used throughout the process. One that comes back to the question of containment and safety are what we call zone cards, hollow cards, or containment zones. And these can be really used as a way to place something on the board that's maybe missing or absent in the storyteller's situation that's being storyboarded. So these absences might come up spontaneously during the session, or they may be something that you would gently probe if you were, curious about what may be absent or missing, as an example. I know that's a bit vague, but it's so context specific. So we can often put things in these hollow zones if we don't want to discuss them, or if something is missing in somebody's, life story or what they're presenting, but they don't want to address it at that time. Again, there are many elements in the game or in the storyboard that can represent people and other significant beings. Just draw your attention to these cute little animal cards here. So I didn't appreciate the significance and importance that animals played, particularly in children's lives, until children told me all the time, "Why don't you have a card for a dog?" I need a dog, or my goldfish. I need to show you on my board where my goldfish sits, because that goldfish is really important to me. So there's all sorts of element cards here that represent people in your life, significant others, etc. As well, there are dwelling cards and event cards and act cards. And where these cards situate on the board, there's if you get a kit, it's very clearly articulates where they can be placed, but there's no prescribed way to use them. If you're seeing this and thinking, oh my gosh, this sounds so confusing, I hear you. And initially it does. But you very quickly become comfortable and develop a familiarity with the elements and the cards. And to be honest, it doesn't really matter what they represent, so long as they're facilitating this process of discussion and engagement, and you as the facilitator are comfortable with the engagement and using the tools. Just like in genograms, there are roles and interaction patterns that can be represented by various cards and markers and place cards on the board. And also there are various feelings and esteem cards, thought clouds, and question cards that can be put out. Again, the question cards might be used to guide the session in that particular moment, or they might be things that the storyteller has considered, or questions have come to mind as they've engaged in the process. And here are those secret cards that I talked about. And these are really important cards because they represent things like, I don't want to tell, I'm not able to control, I'm not able to recall it right now, or I'm trying to block this out. And again, we use these cards in the context of containment and safety and security, because they can really set the context and help to ease the storyteller's discomfort and hesitation by acknowledging that there are some things that might come out, or certain aspects of their life story or situation that might be unsettling or upsetting, and they might want to keep it a secret at that time and forever. So these are really useful strategies that you can use for containment. So I'm just going to show you here the typical setup. So this is how you kind of initially set it up. So you have an ID card. We ask that people, either create something with the clay that represents them, so like a little icon, or that's what kids like to do, or like draw a picture. Don't put any names, because we want to keep it anonymous as possible. So you've got the ID card. You can see on the right-hand side, there are those secret cards that are put up right away. We have a body card, and this is where participants can indicate on the body card if they're having any strong feelings, both positive and negative, as they're expressing their story. And we see this a lot in adults who have had experiences with childhood sexual abuse. They often use that body card to describe those experiences and where they felt those pains. And so then we also, of course, have the hollow zone card, that deep blue card there. So that's the typical setup. And then here are some of those customized platelets. It's up to you what you want to use or what you think would be most useful as you're going through the process with your client or with your research participant. So here is an example of one storyboard that was recently used and was filmed for that SAGE research methods online repository. For the sake of time, I'm not going to show the case example, but you do have the link, and you have the link to the promo site. So you shouldn't have to enter any, you shouldn't have to pay for any access. And for those of you who are affiliated with the university, you should already have access that way. But I encourage you to see the case study example of Angela so that you can understand how a storyboard is constructed and created. And this is an example of a woman who's detailing her personal life situation around the scenario of a recent migration and family settlement here in Winnipeg. So I'm going to move on just to the case studies, and I'm seeing that our time is very, very quickly passing us by. So I will pause for questions at the very end. But the first case study I wanted to talk about was was my work that I've alluded to earlier in the presentation. And this was exploring global well-being of school-age children. So not sure if anyone has heard of the Children's World Study. It's a worldwide research study on children's subjective well-being with the aim of improving children's lives, right? So engaging children, hearing from them directly in the research process. So what are things that are important to kids' lives? And, you know, who should care? Why would that influence the work that we do as decision makers and academics and the general public? So it's a really cool study. It's been going on for several years now, multiple waves, now close to 130,000 children between the ages of 8 and 12 participated in 35 countries, I believe now. I actually led the study in Winnipeg in wave one. It was a very, very, very difficult process, and that's a conversation for another time. But all in all, what I found when I conducted this research, these are kind of the domains we were curious about children's lives and wanting to know more about. This study used a very traditional pen and paper kind of questionnaire method. And some kids liked the emojis, others hated them. And consistently, when we looked at what predictors of subjective well-being were, this is how I was modeling it, children shared that it was things like ground bullying, perceptions of safety at school, and respect for their rights that were most predictive of subjective well-being. But what I also heard from children during this study was that nearly 100% of the children felt like the questions they were asked were important. Actually, this was 100% in the Canadian sample, but globally, across all these countries, children felt that what they were being asked was important. But the majority of children told us that the questionnaire was too long, and almost a third of them said that the survey was so boring to complete, and that we as researchers needed to get more creative and think about better ways to ask children about their lives and engage them in the research process. So I really took that to heart, and so did several other colleagues. And so we set up the Children's Understanding of Wellbeing, which is this multinational qualitative study. And so here in Manitoba, I recruited just over 20 children. Again, they were children that had participated in the quantitative study. So they did the survey, and I conducted these semi-structured interviews with the life storyboard here. So as I mentioned earlier, they were audio recorded and transcribed. And it was such a fascinating and engaging experience, and a wonderful way for children to be able to express themselves. And you can see that the board's like, you're not making sense of this board. That's not the purpose, but it was the discussion that my research team and I had with these children that was just so rich and engaging. Here's another one. Again, with children, I tend not to use a lot of the icons on the board. This girl was talking about a significant event in her life where she broke her arm, talking about how she feels at home, how she feels at school, being left out, just all sorts of really rich discussion and information. And these interviews lasted, sometimes they could last even up to an hour and a half long. It was really interesting. And so here's another one of a girl who really liked to draw a lot on her board. So all that being said, what I learned from this, from this particular study was that, you know, one, I was being responsive to the children saying, there's got to be a better way for you to engage with us in research in a way that's, you know, to be honest, developmentally appropriate, fun, and engaging, and still honors children's rights to participate in research. And in a way that would give us a lot of rich data. This study's been, a few of the studies that have come from this, a few articles have been published rather, that have come from this. Another, just going to wrap it up. I'll just take 2 more minutes here and then we'll turn it over to questions. A second study that I wanted to talk about was the use of the storyboard in substance use disorders treatment. So This is a colleague, Dr. Ashton Ledger. He's a third-year psychiatry resident at the University of Manitoba. He is using the storyboard in both the Crisis Response Center in terms of doing a comprehensive assessment, and he's also using it in inpatient addictions treatment programs over the long term. So he starts a session, and he does a session with a client, and then they continue to build on the session week to week. And he's also been using the session rating scale to evaluate the effectiveness of using the storyboard with the clients, and the results are very promising. Another study that I'll highlight, and again, you'll have access to this, is a study that was looking at uncovering childhood experiences of parental incarceration. This is Dr. Jane Pickering from the University of Calgary. This is absolutely fascinating work, and she has recently published a documentary that was filmed by the Canadian Coalition of Children with Incarcerated Parents. And in the documentary, you can see how the storyboard is being used with adults to reflect back on what it was like during their childhood having a parent incarcerated. And it's a really, really interesting piece of work. And then the final study I just want to talk to or introduce is some colleagues from Otago University in New Zealand are conducting a study to look at Maori students' experiences in the Faculty of Sciences, and really looking at, are those experiences different compared to other students who are not of Maori origin, and looking at differences among students who would be in undergraduate, postgraduate, and first-year students. So this is really interesting work. And this board looks completely different than all the other boards. And I love it because it really does illustrate that there's just not this is the flexibility that's the value. There are several research studies that have been published. Again, they're all available online. You have access to libraries. Some really interesting work is being done in Kyrgyzstan with adolescent migrants and access to education. So with that in mind, I'm going to stop. I feel like I haven't taken a breath yet. I know I've presented a lot of information. I'm excited about this work. I hope that comes across virtually. Please, I would encourage you to engage, take down my email. Happy to have one-on-one conversations. If anybody is interested in exploring this further, potentially getting a toolkit. I know in the Faculty of Social Work here, we have, the faculty has a couple of toolkits that our students are able to rent out, just like a library book or another resource. And much to my dismay, whenever I go to use one, they're always gone. So I think that's a good thing. But yeah, there's plenty of opportunities for collaboration and research and just further discussion should you be interested. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and maybe I can see you all again.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ashley. This is great. There's so many good questions that we have. So really engaged audience. And I'm thinking we should probably talk about, maybe we'll get a few kits here for Laurier that we could have at the lab that I'm running, so that, you know, students or faculty could take it out or just look at it. The other thing I'm thinking as you're talking is we should really have maybe a hands-on workshop next year. So maybe you and I should chat about getting you out here to visit us, and we could have a hands-on workshop where we actually work with the kit. So that would be fantastic. I have a few questions. A few little things. I did put the link to the SAGE video that you were referring to in the chat. So if anybody wants to check it out, you can go to that website. And our library at Laurier does have a subscription, so you should be able to access those materials for free. And then we're also going to be posting the video of today on the CRISP website. So you can take a look out for that, because the video will be there, so you can look at the resources. So I have a few questions from the audience. I have one question about literacy. Can you talk about kind of the literacy element of participants, for participants who might not be, you know, I see there's a lot of words, there's a lot of letters and things like that, but can you talk about kind of how literacy is addressed with populations that might not have high literacy rates?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And in fact, I think the tool was never intended to to have so much text. In fact, most of the tools are like these like little kind of icons and things where there isn't any writing on them. So I think that they, how much literacy is needed. I think you can make it work for even young children who you don't need to have that as a central element. In fact, when working with newcomers where English is not their first language, we often use a translator and interpreter to conduct the interviews as well, but there's very little text written on the boards at all.
That's great. And then another question is from Erin. Hi, Erin. Good to see you here. Can you provide some examples or prompts that might be used by storytellers to create and then reflect on the storyboard? Maybe from your own experience, what are some questions that might be used in that process of creating the life storyboard?
Yeah, that's interesting. So the prompt, well, again, it depends on what your research question is or what you're trying to suss out. But what I always say is, typical to the genogram is like, let's start with you. Where are you on this board? Let's tell me who's in your family. And so you kind of are starting to build out the genogram, and you're kind of getting the key players and significant individuals placed on the board first and foremost. And then there you can say, oh, okay, so who is this person and where is she? Why is she significant to your life? Oh, she's your, for a little kid, oh, she's your friend at school. Okay, so tell me more about Bree. Where do you hang out? Like, again, it's like, honestly, sometimes it's just the conversation that flows, but other times, if you are doing it in a research capacity, you're often going to have a semi-structured interview guide. And, as any good interviewer, you're not like, question number one, let's escape that out. It's more of a conversation. You as the guide know what you need to cover. So you might, not do it exactly in the sequence that's written in your research proposal, but eventually you're going to get there. And actually, what I think is most interesting about the storyboard is because you're creating this lifescape, oftentimes what happens is people will say, oh, I wanted to tell you something else about my cousin. And they'll point to like their cousin on the board. And we just talked about the cousin, like we talked about them 40 minutes ago. But now they're seeing, because they've got this perspective now, they're coming back and they're saying, oh, I want to add something here. Or the other thing that happens is you'll often see they'll take the marker and they'll draw connections to things, or they'll use the clay to show how people and events are represented and related to one another. So I know that was kind of like a convoluted answer to your question, but I often start by placing you as the storyteller on the board. That's like my first spot.
It sounds like it's just a really empowering it can be a very empowering method for participants because they're leading the research in a way. They're leading you in the direction that they want to lead you. And I think that that's really suited to a social work perspective where we meet the client where they're at, we meet the people that we're working with where they're at, and we let them kind of take the lead on where they want to go. And so this might also be protective a bit in terms of them not wanting to talk about certain things, right? Because they're going to lead you in a certain direction of what they do want to share.
Exactly. And I think that really comes back to what Rob envisioned initially was, how can I provide a dignified way to honor these stories, in research, in clinical work. And that's, I think, honestly, what I find so like kind of beautiful about the process is it truly, to me, does feel like it's participant led and participant driven. Again, we have our research, protocols and our questions, but there is a lot of flexibility in that. And I think that from a social work or a clinical, if any of you are clinicians by training, I think that is a strength to come in to do this work, because you know how to kind of probe and scaffold and extend and make those help see those connections in a very gentle and dignified way.
Yeah. One last question, Ashley, and then we're going to let you go and everyone else go. But it's such a great question from Ryan, who's one of our BSW students. How do the results of the LSB using it in research compare with other kinds of maybe visual participatory methods assessing children's perspectives of well-being? It's a great question.
That is a great question. And I would encourage anybody who's looking for a thesis or a dissertation to potentially consider that, because it hasn't been done yet. Like, we haven't really done this, like, head to head comparison of like the storyboard, with another kind of approach or method, because there are other things that are out there. I think what the storyboard does is it kind of brings a lot of great elements from other things that we're already familiar and use in our work. Again, the only thing I can really think of is when I was doing that Children's World survey and the kids were doing the surveys, and they were like, this, I'll never forget. Thanks, lady, for the opportunity. This is super interesting. I'm glad you care, but how you asked us really sucks. And I was like, okay, noted.
It seems like it's always evolving, right? Based on participants' feedback too. So that's really interesting.
Yeah. The other thing too, I hear a lot of is like people like using their hands. We like creating. We've really kind of gone away from that in our virtual world. There has been some discussion about creating a virtual life storyboard. And there's some things that are already out there, but I think there is so much personally, I think there's so much value in you physically having that tactile, that sensorial experience of creating and having the dialogue that goes with it. I think that's so rich. Anybody who's an OT or PT would certainly agree.
Thank you so much again, and really appreciate you spending the time with us to share this amazing method, and has so much potential. And please, participants, stay tuned. We'll try to arrange a hands-on workshop if we can next year, but we'll advertise it through Laurier and through my network. So stay tuned for that. And thanks again, Ashley. It's a wonderful method, and you're a wonderful presenter as well. So,
oh, well, thanks for the opportunity. And if you are still interested and want to learn more now, we can do virtual community of practices. You can join our clinical groups and our research teams. So please, I honestly am genuine. Reach out. I promise I will respond to you. And again, Bree, thanks for the opportunity.
take care, everybody. Thank you.
Take
Have a
good
great
care,
day.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.